we want to see art on stream. It's funny you should say that. We're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to do some art on stream. I say we.
It's collaborative. It's together.
I have literally no part of this. We are going to kind of test out a new segment, and it is called Sketching Shakespeare. Y'all were part of that collaborative idea last time we were on. We are going to take a piece of Shakespeare's text. I'm going to read it and talk about it, and Swan is going to draw it. Yay! Yeah, it's gonna be really cool. I am so excited for it. We're gonna take a quick break and get ourselves settled, and then so don't go anywhere. I'm gonna put the "Don't Go Anywhere" banner up. Nope, not that one. Yes, don't leave. I should make a new banner that just says "Don't leave." We'll be right back, and we'll see you then. We're here to entertain and educate. We can't help it. We're both teachers. It's like in our gut instinct.
Yeah, this is what we do, even when we don't mean to. So, okay. So I'm going to be working in my digital art program, so I probably won't be checking chat just as much. But I've got Steph who will shout out stuff to me. Yeah. I'm going to pull up my notes so that I can see things.
So yeah, we're kicking it off. I wanted to start with a speech that was kind of full of action and imagery, and we're starting with The Tempest. And it's not a play that I generally love. I think that Prospero is a bad character who I don't love to hate. I just don't like him as a character. He's a selfish old man. Okay. So generally I kind of veer away from The Tempest, but I conversely think that Ariel is one of my favorite characters in all of Shakespeare. So we're taking an Ariel speech, and it's from the very beginning, so not a lot of spoilers here. We're trying to keep it relatively spoiler free. This is from the literal Tempest, the storm that's happening at the start of the play. And Ariel's kind of he kicks off the action of the play with carrying out Prospero's intentions of intentions of shipwrecking the vessel that is coming. They want to get all of the people on the island. And so he carries out this duty, and he comes back and reports back and says, "I boarded the king's ship, now on the beak, now in the waist, the deck. In every cabin I flamed amazement. Sometimes I'd divide and burn in many places. On the topmast, the yards, and bowsprit, I would flame distinctly, then meet and join. Jove's lightnings, the precursors of the dreadful thunderclaps, more momentary and sight outrunning were not. The fire and cracks of sulphurous roaring, the most mighty Neptune seemed to besiege and make his bold waves tremble, yea, and his trident shake. Not a soul but felt a fever of the mad and played some tricks of desperation. All but mariners plunged in the foaming brine and quit the vessel. Then all afire with me, the king's son Ferdinand, with hair upstaring, then like reeds, not hair, was the first man that leapt and cried, 'Hell is empty, and all the devils are here.'" One of my favorite lines of Shakespeare. Hell is empty, and all the devils are here. There's so much just emotion and fear, and reporting it back, I feel like Ariel is kind of like proud of that. Like, look what I did to instill this type of fear in our in the people. So basically, the general breakdown of the speech is that he flew onto the ship and set fire to it. It's kind of the general bottom line for all of those lines. Got onto that ship, did a lot of fire. Everyone besides the sailors jumped off. And he talks about the magic that he does. He splits himself in different pieces. So he starts off throwing fireballs at the front of the ship, the top of the ship, in all of the cabins. He kind of made himself present, made the people aware of him, and then started splitting himself in 2, 3, 4 to be at all of those places of the ship at the same time. So not only does this spirit show up, that starts throwing fireballs at you. How do you react if you are a 15th century sailor or a king who is just trying to get home from his daughter's wedding? And then one step further, splits himself in 2, 3, 4, and just shows up on all of the different sides of the ship. Still throwing fire, still creating this huge tempest. When we talk about imagery and kind of creating these vivid scenes of Shakespeare, this set of lines is one of my favorites. Jove's lightnings, the precursors of the dreadful thunderclaps, more momentary and sight outrunning were not. The fire and cracks of sulphurous roaring, the most mighty Neptune seemed to besiege and make his bold waves tremble, yea, his dread trident shake. So that first part, we take Jove's lightnings, the precursors of the dreadful thunderclaps, more momentary and sight outrunning were not. So these flashes of lightning were happening so fast, even faster than normal lightning. So it's just all of this playing tricks on your eyes, and the fact that this spirit is here and doing all of these supernatural things. And Future Skeleton says all that cool shit happened in the 15th century and we never get rad spirits bombing boats or anything in 2021. But I think part of the illusion or the fear here is that they might not necessarily see him because it is dark, all of the clouds have rolled over, and the lightning is so brief that, you know, in scary movies when they flash the lights and you think you see a ghost in the background, and then but it, like, when the lights come back on, it's not there. That's kind of the feeling that I get from this scene, is that the lightning flashes so quickly that you have this glimpse of this spirit and you don't really know if your eyes are playing tricks on you or if it's actually happening. And then the fire and cracks of sulphurous roaring, the most mighty Neptune seemed to besiege and make his bold waves tremble, yea, his dread trident shake. Neptune, the god of the sea, is so afraid that he is making all of these waves happen. He is shaking the sea because even the god of the ocean is terrified by this spirit throwing down all of these thunderbolts. And I think there's a real, like, loss of control in that fear there. If you are Neptune and you are meant to be in control of the storms and the waves and all of this, and you have lost that control to something that you don't necessarily understand or know about. And this is one speech in a full play, right? If we spent time on all of these subtle moments, we would be at the theater for years. But, like, I just think the imagery there is so cool that Ariel is so powerful that even the gods below the sea are shaking. Emily, I want to ask you, when you are looking at scenes like this with a lot of movement, how do you approach that in art? Like, this huge thing is happening. How do you get that on paper?
So there's a cool thing when it comes to the pacing, especially in comics. So because, like with reading the actual prose, you can read it as fast or as slow as you want. So the idea being that you want to try and focus the audience's view to keep with pacing. So with this, I obviously I'm starting at the top with kind of setting up the scene, because you need to know where we are and kind of what's happening, even if I don't give you a lot more information to that. But then what I want to do is I want to start making a lot of, like, small, quick panels, because that, especially if there's a jump from one thing and a jump to another thing, that's going to give that kind of unease and that quicker pace feeling to the audience. And so I want it to kind of be, you can tell what's going on, but you can't really tell, and you're not getting a lot of clues around that. So I definitely want to, I want to have these flashes of moment. And again, like when you're talking about how quick the flashes are, that's not something that I can represent because it is a static medium. So I need to make sure that I'm giving you that kind of off-kilter, unsettled feel with either how quickly or how many panels I'm doing, or just the muddled nature of what you can see. So I'm trying to keep that in mind because it does have kind of a frantic feel to it.
That's really cool. So you only get those that ghost in the corner. You don't you can't
Right.
capture that, but the faster the panels are, or the faster the panels change, I guess, is how you create that movement.
Yeah, and to kind of jump to one thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And because we are being introduced to this, and we'll say, so if you're just watching me draw, I haven't described any of these characters. They don't have any specific facial features. So you're kind of just like, well, who am I following now? And like, I can tell like one of these people is the aggressor and one of them isn't, from body language, but that's all you're getting. And I'm trying to really amp that up so that you're getting that feel from the characters and their poses.
So that's really interesting. I have like two things to piggyback off of on that. On stage in a Shakespeare show, the scene that we get that starts this play is all of the sailors, and it is during this tempest, and it is, while their ship is being attacked, and it's all like the captain being like, oh shit, tail the topmast, bosun, do your thing. And they're all like, oh my God. And then all of the royals are like, what's happening? And they're like, just get the hell below decks, go to your home. This is our thing. You might rule us on land, but you have no business being here. So you don't know who status is so important in Shakespeare. Your lords, your kings, your rulers are so important, and everyone is striving for that level of power. And then in the beginning of this play, when you don't know who anyone is, let's say you're going into the Tempest, totally blank page, you don't know anyone, you're going to assume that these characters who show up in the first scene and the last scene and never in the middle, the bosun, the captain, the sailors, they have the power. They are in charge. The king has no power here. So like what you say, when you see who's the aggressor and who is afraid, who has the power in that scene visually, even if they don't have facial expressions, you know how to create that visually. It's the same on stage, that you don't have character names under your actors. They don't walk around with their character name like on their hat. I think it'd be a lot easier for some people if they did, but part of directing is making exactly what you just said clear. Who has the power in the scene, who is doing the action, and who is the action being done to. And so that's a cool thing that kind of translates really well to stage without that kind of text medium. And then the second thing I wanted to call out there is that it is exactly the opposite in Shakespeare to create movement than in comics, apparently. Because to create a sense of urgency, your lines get longer, or your sentences get longer. And the best piece of advice I have for reading Shakespeare is always look for the sentences. My master's program was a lot about editing Shakespeare and like how to create a new edition from a blank slate. And the first thing you do is you take out all of the punctuation, because so much of the punctuation was like, hey, we ran out of colons for this line of, because it's all printing press, so we ran out. We don't have any more little metal colons. You want to just throw a period in there? Just make it a full stop? Or like, oh, we ran out of full stops. It's just gonna be a comma here. We're just gonna end this line with a comma. It doesn't mean anything. It's not like, it has no grammatical significance. It has no significance. So you take all of the punctuation out, and then you read it from scratch, and you add the punctuation in. So a lot of that work when you get modern editions has been done for you, so you can trust it a little bit more. But it's so crucial to read to the sentences. So if I were to read, let's see. I boarded the king's ship. If I were to read it line by line, I boarded the king's ship, now on the beak. Now in the waist, the deck, in every cabin. I flamed amazement, sometime I'd divide, and burn in many places. Or on the topmast, to finish that. But it kind of like doesn't really make sense grammatically.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Imaginary Nomad. And thanks y'all in chat for being into this.
Yeah, awesome.
I do think a lot, like what Elle Hanley says, if Shakespeare was illustrated, it would have been a game changer. There are some really great Shakespeare comics out there, and I absolutely encourage. I know there are a lot of Shakespeare purists, but I defy them and I hate them because he's been dead for 450 years. We don't need to we don't need to like revel in the beauty of his words. We can, and we can make them accessible to a more modern audience and make them visually pleasing. I think there's so much that we can do to Shakespeare to make it more accessible. And part of that is reading sentences. So I boarded the king's ship, now on the beak, now in the waist, the deck in every cabin. I flamed amazement, sometimes I divide. Those lines don't really make a lot of sense until you read, I boarded the king's ship as one preface to the sentence. Now we've set the action, where Ariel was. We know whose ship it was. We know what kind of vessel it was. We're ready. Now on the beak, now in the waist, the deck in every cabin, I flamed amazement. So we have here, 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 I did this. And those are reading within lines. So you're reading sentences and thoughts rather than people like kind of pausing at the end of every line to follow the structure. It's following the actual thoughts that are happening. What's up, Tony P? We're talking about Shakespeare. Welcome. Emily is drawing Shakespeare. We picked a scene or a this looks just like our show. What do you mean? We picked a speech from the Tempest, and I'm kind of talking through some Shake stuff, and Swan is drawing it out. But yeah, so you have these long lines, and because as an actor, you're naturally going to run out of breath or speed up your reading to get your breath in, that's what creates that sense of urgency. If you have short lines, you're going to pace yourself and take more breaths and take more breaks because you can, because the grammar allows it. When you have a big, long sentence, and that's why we talk about finding the punctuation, because then it goes and informs the speed at which you're going to say it or the urgency with which you're going to say it. So that's kind of the exact opposite, it sounds, from comics, where you're creating short, fast panels to create that urgency.
Yeah. No, but that's fascinating. And the punctuation thing is very cool to think about, because I feel like, especially when you're learning it in English, you're taught such specific, like, nope, this means this, and period means stop, and comma means breath, and all of that. And it's kind of harped into you so much that I think that's kind of a hard thing to try and then break as you're reading this in a very different, tempo. And I think, again, it's to the detriment of the student who has to read it and to the class when people who've never read the text before and you're forced to read out loud because you're not reading it how it should have been performed or read. And it's hard because I know with some of them, like, even when I read the prose that you wrote me for your mystery thing, like, I had to read it a couple of times because there was a tempo to it, and it took me a little bit to make that make sense. And so, it wasn't my first take that I ended up recording and sending in. Like, I had to read it a couple of times to get that feel to it and to how I felt comfortable saying it.
Yeah, and it doesn't, if you're not used to speaking in iambic pentameter or in even just blank verse in general, it doesn't roll off the tongue very easily. Sometimes it does, and those are the lines that we teach with iambic pentameter. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. You naturally hit those soft, light, yonder window breaks. Like, you hit those beats. But if you're not used to it, and you don't have just a natural practiced rhythm, I guess natural and practiced are contradictory terms, a practiced rhythm, then it's hard. And I think that having kids read Shakespeare out loud, and maybe this is because I teach a lot of lower level students, I do a lot of inclusion classes, and so I would never ask my kids to read Shakespeare out loud. We watch it. And then if they want to do speeches, we have, opportunities for them to read lines or read speeches to get them because for most of them it's their first exposure to Shakespeare. But I think that one of the I don't want to say worst, because I know a lot of teachers have had success with it, but I feel like one of the tougher things to do is just have your kids read it out loud. They're not internalizing it. They're more worried about getting the words out of their mouths than actually, feeling what those words mean. And it's I got nervous to read Shakespeare on this show tonight. And that's what I do. It's hard, and it doesn't feel natural unless you've been exposed to it quite a bit. And so it's definitely something to work on, but like not if you don't want to.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do it, don't do it. That's interesting, L. Hanley. So L. Hanley says, I didn't like memorizing Shakespeare. Reading Canterbury Tales and Beowulf out loud was fun, though. And I think where the distinction is, and I might be wrong, but Canterbury Tales and Beowulf, because they're Old English, they've been translated already. So they're in a more modern meter and a more modern vocabulary. I love Beowulf. I love Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales is like one of my favorite texts to just dig into. There's so much juice there. They're so they're so saucy. They're so scandalous. But yeah, I also think memorizing is hard. It was my favorite assignment in high school. My teacher said, memorize this monologue from Macbeth and present it to the class. And I was like, this is what I was born for. That's when I fell in love with Shakespeare. I was like, oh, you're going to test my memory? Cool. But I'm like, I love theater and I love memorizing things. And that's me, 1 out of 30 students in one class. And it's such a hard expectation for a lot of students that I think for extra credit and stuff, it's really fun to throw those different projects and opportunities in there, especially now when we have so much video software available for students that they can film themselves doing it. There are a lot of benefits of getting it out of your mouth, but I think that watching performance and seeing it, so seeing comics or seeing films or seeing these characters on stage helps open up a lot of that understanding. Oh, that's cool. You had to write your own modern Canterbury Tale. I want to hear what yours was about. And then you saw Beowulf performed in Atlanta. That's awesome. What a cool experience. Getting to, especially Beowulf is not commonly performed. So getting to experience a text like that is so heavy and so bogged down with that oral tradition style of storytelling, which is a lot of words for maybe not a lot of action. Listen, so Future Skeleton in chat says I make fun of him for how cool his AP Spanish teacher was. Like cool is like she would like have them over to her house to watch movies, and that just as an educator makes me uncomfortable. So cool is subjective, and I'm so glad that he had that experience and that developed his love for Spanish literature, because I think that his ability to dig into Spanish literature is incredible, and he's a genius. But I personally would not be. I don't want kids to know where I live. I don't want them to be in my house. I don't want them anywhere near me. I love them, but I don't want to see them. That's just me. Oh, okay. I have some things to say. The Shakespeare's Tavern is so cool, and we didn't get a chance to go in last year when we were at Dragon Con, but I cannot wait to go. 2, the food court at the mall was your topic for your modern Canterbury Tale. I need to know more, because what a place of action. There's so much happening, and I think that that as kind of a modern pilgrimage, so many people of so many different backgrounds and goals and personalities all mingling in one place together for the same purpose of eating, is such a cool, that's brilliant. That is inspired and brilliant, and I absolutely need to know more. Stealth King says, I've only seen Of Mice and Men. Do you mean the Gary Sinise movie because that's cool. I hate John Steinbeck. I hate John Steinbeck so much that I wrote a short story, a post-apocalyptic short story about a girl who made a time machine because she figured out the exact moment in history when all hope for the future was shattered. And she goes back in time with the intent of killing John Steinbeck before he can write the ending to Of Mice and Men. So that's the level with which I hate John Steinbeck. I am so glad that you got to see the play and that you got to experience that. That's super cool. A lot of my students love Of Mice and Men, and I will say it's a very realistic depiction of the inability to reach the American dream. I just prefer Gatsby as the expression of the inability to reach the American dream because it has 1,000 times more champagne. So actually, Ace Fury, if you look it up, John Steinbeck like literally looks like the devil. Like, he looks like, if you imagine the devil in your mind, Mike is so embarrassed of me right now. His head is literally in his hand. John Steinbeck like looks like a depiction of like Satan. So oh man, Elle Hanley. Yeah, I think that's a really inspired choice. Thank you, Ace Furry. You can't see it. I'm glad. You know what? Somehow we have more viewers now talking about talking about time travel and John Steinbeck than Shakespeare. Wild. But to bring it back, Emily, what are you what is happening here? And can you tell me, because and this is a super this is going to show you how little I read comics, and I do want to read more of them. But on that left-hand side, do you read down 1, 2, 3 first before going right?
So that's actually a really, really cool thing. And it's a great question because the idea being, so let me roll back. So depending on whether if you're reading traditional, we'll say American comic books, or if you're reading something out of Japan, which is manga, or Korea, China, the like. So obviously the way that they read their text is different. So there are some where if you're reading ones that have been adapted, then they will keep the panel layout the same, but they will switch up the text. So you're still reading it the way that we read, left to right, up to down, but you're reading it kind of backwards. So all of that. So there is a traditional flow to it. But what's important, and what is something that I think about when I'm creating, is that if I was someone who had never read comics before, would I be able to figure out what was going on even if I didn't know the right way to read it? So there's something very specific with how you lay out your panels that should bring your eye through the page. And there's something here. I'll draw it on a separate layer because that's kind of a cool thing. Of course, I made a new layer and I can't figure out. There it is. All right, so I'm going to do it in a different color. And since it's red, it seems appropriate. So because we read, left to right, up to down, there's this kind of like reverse S that you think about when you're creating a page where you kind of want the eye to be drawn through here. And because you end at the bottom of the page here, and that's where the person is going to pick it up and turn the page, you need to make sure that you're pushing the eye in this direction and not leaving them hanging over here with the final bit of your page, because that's not going to make them want to come to this side and then turn the page. So there really is, obviously you can get into like the golden spiral thing and Fibonacci sequence and all of that. And I'm trying to very purposely draw your eye in a specific way down the page as I'm doing it. So my hope is that even if you're reading this panel, then this panel, then this panel, and then kind of jumping over, that works. But also that if you did read it, this one and then this one, I'm trying to get it to all build up to, I'm getting so many layers now, but I'm trying to get it to build up to like this moment. And I'm even debating if I want to then have another one that is, we'll say, like a zoomed in shot of what's happening here to really hit that moment. So, as you were reading it to me, what stuck out to me was this moment of terror and fear, and honestly the sentence that you loved so much. I want to hit that. I want to have essentially, a sailor being here and reaching up to Ariel and saying this and having the look on his face of honestly exactly what we're talking about, that evil of, I'm unconcerned with what's happening to you here. So I want that in any of these moments, I've got, one character that's obviously in control of the situation and looming over another character, and the fear of these guys and the uncertainty. And then when you finally get, his frantic movement stopping, you're just getting one cold look back at these characters who are scared, and you get nothing from him.
So, okay. So I have one more. I have one more technical question from them, and then I'm gonna geek out. On that, if you were to do a zoomed in close up in that bottom panel, would you purposefully put his like eyes or wherever his face is on the right hand side of the page, or like because you said you want to draw the reader over? Like, is that something that you wouldn't want to put his face on the left-hand side, because then it would be more blank space on the right?
Yes, and so there's a rule, and this was something I actually learned from almost like a cinematography thing, and it's you don't want to break the 180 rule. So if you have two characters talking to each other, so we'll say we've got blue on one side and green on the other side. If you switch over and have it like, you need to not have all of a sudden green show up on that side and blue show up on that side, because it's going to confuse the audience. Like if you have a car that's traveling into the scene this way, and then all of a sudden you get a cut and then it's going that way and it hasn't made a turn, it confuses the audience as to which direction they're traveling. So with this, my goal would be to take, because this part right here is where I want the big focus to be. So I even want to just take what would be like a camera zoom and preserve that layout.
Okay.
Because then, and again, because you do have all of this empty space here to kind of slow it down. There it is. That's the slow down. So we've had all these quick panels and this quick movement, and now all of a sudden we've just got one slow thing where the only thing that's happening in that is the zoom in on this character from this scene here, where you're getting, we'll say, I don't want to say resolution, but kind of for this setup, you're getting resolution. You're getting the first pause that you've had this whole page.
Yeah, and that's because in the speech, that's the focus line. It's everything leading up to that is setup. And this is like, if you think of it like a joke, the whole first, I don't know, 12 lines. I don't know how many lines it is. And this is actually two speeches put together, and I put them together because I wanted to have the hell is empty and I wanted to have the visual of the fire. So Prospero has a line in the middle, and he's like, "Oh, that's cool. Good job." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm super cool." So that is the button. That's the button on the scene. It's the punchline of the joke. And so having that as a longer panel at the end to let that moment sit, because as an actor, you should like let that moment kind of have a little bit of breath. So seeing that reflected in the panel is super freaking cool.
That is really cool. And it's exciting for me. So this is cool. So I'll give you behind my brain of it. So Steph sent me the words that she was going to read, and I read them, but I only read them quickly because I didn't want to spend too much time on it. What I wanted to hear was you saying it to me and the tone and the pace that you did it, and to just kind of draw what I was then inspired by that. And because you did subconsciously and I think consciously build up to that line, that told me in my brain, this is important. This is a big thing. And this is a pivotal moment of this scene. And while we need all the setup to lead to that, this is I don't want to say money shot because that's a terrible thing to say. That's the one. There's the hit. There's the hard hit that we built up to get to it. And that's great. Like, you're looking for those hard moments. And if you can build up to them and make them hit even harder, then that feels great. It feels great as a reader, and it feels great as an artist to kind of get like lead up and to all of a sudden have that payoff and have it feel good at the end of a page.
Yeah, that's super cool. So the other thing I wanted to geek out about is, so when we talked about it, Swan had said this is that she wanted to have less context, or to approach it without context, so that her interpretation landed on the page more unbiased with like my context. And I think that's really cool because Ariel is one of the kindest, sweetest, most gentle characters in all of Shakespeare. And yeah, and happens to have probably the most power out of any of them. So Ariel is in service of Prospero. He is Prospero's servant, and he is fulfilling, contract after contract, essentially, to buy his freedom. And this is one of the things that Ariel does at the start of the play, and it's the first introduction we get. These are Ariel's first lines, I think, or some of Ariel's very first lines aboard of the King's ship. And to not have the context of who that is as a character is absolutely this interpretation of this like demonic monster throwing fireballs at a ship, like putting people's lives in danger and setting a ship on fire. Later on in the scene, we understand that all of the mariners have been taken care of. They've been put to a gentle sleep in the ship. The ship has been repaired. It's hiding in a dock, or like a little like cave. What do you call a water cave on an island?
Inlet?
Yeah, like an inlet. So they're all safe. They are all well taken care of. And all of the royal characters have been scattered. Grotto, thank you. Have all been, I should have known that because of the Little Mermaid.
I was going to say literally Ariel's grotto, but I only have too much brain. That's why we're happy you're here, chat.
Right. That's what we need you for. So they, all of the other characters have been scattered across the island purposefully to enact this plan of revenge and reconciliation by Prospero. And throughout the play, you see Ariel's gentleness and his begging for his freedom all the way through, starting in this first scene. So while you have interpreted him as this cold, demonic monster, based on the lines I gave you, yes, absolutely. He is proud of what he's done. He is bragging. He is like super excited about, this is what I did. I was here. I was there. I was throwing fire. They were all so scared. I made the god of the ocean afraid. And then that ending of hell is empty and all the devils are here, and reveling in that moment is so contrary to who Ariel becomes or who he is, that we get to see more of throughout this scene and throughout the play. One of my favorite lines of Shakespeare, Ariel has some of my favorite lines in the entire canon. And at the end, spoilers, Prospero is deciding whether to forgive his brother who took over his throne and did all of these evil things, yada, 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 Shakespeare, treason, treachery, feuding. And he's like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if emotions can sway that way. Like, I don't know if emotions can do that or whatever. And Ariel says, mine would if I were human. And it's this sweet, gentle moment that he understands human nature and the arc of forgiveness so much deeper than this ding-dong Prospero could ever hope to. Have I mentioned I don't like Prospero? But because I know that about the character, I tend to interpret this opening scene very, very differently. And so it's so cool to get to see this like really dark, it's dark, and it's, he says it's so dark that the lightning flashes are the tiniest blip in sight, but like seeing it on the page as this like black and white, stormy, really just demonic scene is so cool for me, who's never seen the scene like that. Like, I've never pictured it in that way. And it's like geeking me out.
Well, I'm glad. That makes me happy. But I also think, again, this even talks back to what we talked about with powerful characters, and you get his, I don't want to say redemption necessarily, but you get growth and you get growth from that. So again, in a visual medium, if this is how you're introducing a character, the audience is already inclined to dislike them because they are the agent of chaos on this page. And so then as long as you keep the visuals of that character so that they can always recognize who it is, you get to then follow them. And as you follow them, you learn the more depth and you learn the kind heart that's inside and you learn the motivations behind it. But also with something like this, and I think it's true in a lot of different media. So it starts with a banger. Like, he throws a whole bunch right at the start, and then like, oh yeah, but by the way, everybody's fine. We're totally cool. Ship's fine. But it sucks you in, and you're in immediately, and that's good writing because you want to be hooked, and he got you hooked right away.
Yeah, and I wonder if that how that translates to art. Like, how does that grow? Do you start using lighter colors, less shadow, less darkness? How do you show that growth?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I purposely am putting very harsh lights on this, making him, obviously I'm drawing in black and white because it's easier because I'm doing it really fast, but really trying to, and the idea that being at sea with no land around you and that the only light that you're getting is the flashes of lightning, like, it does suck all the color out of it, but it also then, if you've ever interacted in a strobe light, movement is very weird and it's very stilted, and all of a sudden, like, someone who was, you felt like across the room is now all of a sudden right up next to you, and it's startling. And so the power of the lighting in that is absolutely. So as you would see him interacting throughout, you would do, more lighting on maybe his face. And even so, we'll say if we kept going with this, which I'm happy to do, but what I would probably do is I'd have him, when Ariel's about to interact with Prospero, have him come out of the shadows, and then for the first time you would finally get to see him fully lit and regularly colored. Like, as you're explaining to the audience that nope, everybody is okay, and you are literally bringing him from the shadow to the light. And then as you start to see it, and for me, something that I absolutely love about making comics is drawing facial expressions and is drawing emotion. So, obviously before I would get started with this, I would have a model sheet for the character, and we'll say, when he's first, essentially the god of chaos and terror, you're really hitting hard on the eyebrows and the sunkenness of his eyes and harsh shadows and all of that. But then, so as you get to see him later, and especially too, like, how he's kind of got his head tilted down and you're looking up from underneath your eyebrows. Later on, if he's being more vulnerable, I would maybe have, you definitely have more open eyes. You would have gentler eyebrows to it as he's talking. And even, obviously, this is super, super sketchy, but I would change, so this one, I've got, the hulking presence, the hunched over shoulders, whereas this one, you could have them much less imposing. You're going to have him be much more matter of fact, just a little bit more open. And it's cool because I think this also works exactly like, well, I'm assuming because I've never acted this part, but it's how you would act it. You would want, when you came in as this character, to come in with force and with power, and as you're then delivering calmer lines, you're going to, instead of having that hard tightness across your chest, across your shoulders, you're going to kind of relax and you're going to kind of settle into who you are and what you're saying. And that translates to the audience, whether we realize it or not. That is, the body language is affecting how we are taking those scenes and those moments and the words that he's saying.
Right, and the literal levels that we can use on stage as directors, like what you've done with perspective is super cool because it totally changes the presence of the character. And we would use stairs or blocks or however you've built your stage up, if you had the ability to fly, if you're rich or whatever, if you, whatever you can do to force that perspective of Ariel being as high as possible, not just because he's literally flying, but because you have that kind of godlike presence. And then he becomes so much smaller than Prospero. when you have Prospero on stage, who isn't elevated in anything besides stature and attitude. So like seeing the shift of telling this story, and a lot of productions of the Tempest will stage, this opening scene, the scene that this is happening, that he's recapping, with Ariel on stage throwing these fireballs and stuff. And so the first lines you get to hear Ariel speak, he's already a little bit subjective to Prospero. And I think that's a really cool, I don't think I actively think about how similar a comic and staging a theater production are. But the more we talk, the more similar they seem, because it's all about creating the right movement and the right levels and the right perspective for these characters to tell their story without any lines. Like, we should be able to know what's happening without the words, because as a director of Shakespeare, my base assumption is that nobody understands anything that anyone's saying.
Which is fair. It's very fair.
I direct my dad. My dad will tell you all right now, his favorite line of Shakespeare is "not dead." And yeah, Future Skeleton put it in chat. Because when I was in Othello, I was playing Desdemona, and my dad went through the whole play being kind of like, what the fuck is happening? And then there's a moment where Othello, suffocates Desdemona, but then she has this gasp of life, and he says, "Not dead?" And my dad was like, it was the first time. It was the first time I knew exactly what was happening. I knew you weren't dead. And then you were dead. And so anytime that line comes up in Shakespeare, because it is more than once, let me tell you, I just like, if I'm like in the back of the audience or wherever I am, and like if he's there, it's just like I have to do everything I can to not like catch his eye, because he's just so giddy. I was in Macbeth, and there's a "not dead" at the end of Macbeth, and our director was sitting in the audience, and I was talking to her after. I was like, yeah, like that's my dad's favorite line, and like I had to actively not look up where I knew he was sitting during that. And she's like, I was sitting next to someone who like yelled "not dead" after the actor said it. I was like, that's 100% my dad. Like, absolutely would have been wildly giddy about hearing that. It's exactly, I'm not dead yet. It is exactly like my dad's reaction to that line is a Monty Python sketch. I don't even know where I was going with that, but I just love how, I direct for my dad. I assume that nobody understands any of the words the actors are saying, and it has to all come from physicality, and it has to all come from expression and movement and where the actors are on stage. So who's in power, who has control of the scene just based on stage movement and not the words, volume, tone. And we have those things to play with that you don't necessarily have in art. Or do you? How do you, like, are there ways to create vocal shifts?
So that's a cool thing, and you're gonna let me geek out a little bit now. So something that I think, in a weird way, that feels very Shakespearean is the works of Neil Gaiman, and specifically Sandman. It feels like it has a lot of that. I don't know. There's a whole compendium that goes along with the Sandman series that literally explains all of his references, because he's a smart guy and he's a smart writer. And just like with Shakespeare, it took me a little bit to get into Sandman. But the reason I brought up that one specifically is because there is an incredible gentleman who I've had the pleasure of meeting, whose name is Todd Klein. And Todd Klein is famous in the comic industry for being a letterer. And he's famous with relation to Neil Gaiman is because he lettered all of Sandman. And what's amazing about that is he actually created, and this is a time before the digital technology, he created specific fonts for specific characters. So you have the immortal beings that you're following through this. And so Dream, who's the main one you meet first, has a specific font that is his font. And when other things happen, they have a specific font. And even just with those fonts, they convey different emotions, feeling, and you have obviously the option of, the sound effect one. So, if I was more confident with it, I would probably put in, a huge, like, I'm in the wrong color, but like crack or crash that happened through this, probably in one of the upper parts, because that would indicate that big. And if it's big and if it's crowding the page or the panel, you feel that. So you feel like the text is taking up more space than it should, so it feels big. But the same thing with emphasis, with either capital letters or having a character that's saying something that's getting lost to the sea and the sound. So you'd have like, help me, but the me is starting to get really lost, and you'd trail it off. So you'd actually do a visual representation of that sound being pulled away, or depending on how, abstract you wanted to get, you could even have something of showing almost like the letters being pulled away to represent visually what it sounds like when the sound is pulled away from your voice when you're out and the storm is raging. So I don't think it gets enough credit because there's a whole amazing art element that comes to just the lettering of a page. And that's what's cool. And this is something, so my goal with this, and it's gonna be a long-winded answer, but because my background is animation, I am very happy because I like how that translates to comics. But in my brain, I always want to try and have the page itself tell a story without any of the words in it first. I want the visuals to tell a story because I'm in a visual medium. So while I do have pages in stories that I've illustrated that are just people talking to each other, if you take the text out of it, is it a serious conversation? Is it a happy conversation? You should still be able to get an idea of what's happening even though you don't have the words present. So with this specifically, I was drawing with the idea that you wouldn't have the words in word bubbles on the screen because it was just going to be the movement and then leading up. With something like this, I think it could even be cool if you had like a side panel that actually had the text written along with it. And then what I would do is for this final panel is I would take the line of the in hell line and have that all of a sudden be now in the spoken word of the story.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So there's a lot to play with that, and some of when it talks about with placement and spacing and all of that, and the staging of it is accommodating the word bubbles, because you can have all this cool action, but then if I was trying to be true to the text and had to put word bubbles in over top of it, some of those prose are going to take up that much space or this much space or this much space. I would have designed it poorly to accommodate the actual words being in it. So if I was specifically designing it to be said as it was, I would have changed how I laid out the page because I want the art to work in connection with the words and not just plop the words in on top.
Yeah.
So I think that answers
that's yeah, no, absolutely. It's super cool. It just kind of again piggybacks how much there is in comics that kind of is similar to the way Shakespeare structured his plays, and he uses different rhythms for different types of characters. So like you said, different fonts. I feel like that's kind of a parallel to the fact that if the line is in iambic pentameter, you can infer that, usually, there are always exceptions to the rule, but you can usually infer that the character is educated, higher class, maybe royal. They have more power in the scene than any of the other characters, because they're speaking in iambic pentameter. It's a meter of romance, it's a meter of authority, it's a meter of power, it's a meter of villainy. If you see trochaic tetrameter, which is double, toil and trouble, it's the opposite of iambic and then a shorter line. It's going to be a magical creature. So someone with supernatural powers. Puck. If we shadows have offended, it's that same. So you've got Puck, you've got your fairies, you've got your witches. They speak in a visual. If you're reading it on the page, you can visually see that the lines are shorter. And those are going to be your magical creatures. Those are going to be your spirits and your. Now, of course, Ariel is a spirit and doesn't speak in that rhythm. But again, it's a toss-up whether he follows his own rules or not. And then your comedic characters, or your common man, is going to speak in just prose. They're just going to, there's no meter. You'll see it look more like a paragraph rather than a metered line. So just visually looking on the page, or as you're reading, looking at meter, you can tell a lot about the character who's speaking. And because we don't get character notes, like we get a character list, but they don't give you a lot of information. So looking at the meter in which they speak is a big indication of who they might be, or what class, what status they might be in the play. So that can inform a lot of your acting decisions based on that as well.
That's really cool, though. And literally, just as you were saying, like the toil and trouble, like it has a different feel to it, just as you're saying it. And that's very cool, because I think subconsciously, because so many people use Shakespeare as inspiration, whether, again, consciously or unconsciously, it felt magical to me, just as you said it. Like, I was like, oh, no, that's a character that's not strictly human saying stuff like that. So that's really, really cool.
It sounds like a spell.
Yeah.
Like it has that like more rhythmic, because iambic pentameter sounds more like that natural heartbeat rhythm. And iambic pentameter is more of what we get to hear in like pop music. Pop music uses iambic pentameter more than I think people realize. I usually use Taylor Swift as my example for my kids, because her "But I keep moving, can't stop, won't stop grooving" is iambic, because you hear it go up and down. Botch says pentameter, now you're just making up words. You know what? So did Shakespeare. Shakespeare made up whatever words he wanted. Whenever my students try to find a word for something, I tell them just to make it up. Like if they can't think of the right word that they need, I'll be like, Shakespeare made up all the words he wanted. So don't ever feel limited to the dictionary. You deserve to make up your own words too.
Oh, and just because it feeds on top of what we talked about during the show with our love of David Tennant, there is a Shakespeare episode of Doctor Who. And whether it is based in reality or not, I didn't care, because it was played so well, and the guy that got to do Shakespeare was incredible, and enjoyed him so much more than the lovely gentleman who played him in Shakespeare in Love. But like, it was fun, and it was fun to see them play with that. And there's a reference in it where David Tennant makes a comment about, I think it's like 36 scholars are just shaking their heads now. And I was like, what was that? That was weird. So I looked it up, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's a really smart comment in just a throwaway line. But how fun was that? And, of course, then it ends with Expelliarmus. And I'm just like, I'm in. I'm so in with this crazy show. I love it so much.
So it's so funny that you said that, because I know you're not reading chat. And we got a botched in our chat. And literally as soon as you mentioned it, said, have you ever watched the episode of Doctor Who with Shakespeare? And I love that episode. I think I will take any anachronistic period piece. Like, give me them forever. I want them. I want to see every version of fake Shakespeare or non-Shakespeare or whatever it is. And then like Botch said, in Good Omens as well. And again, we get to see David Tennant. David Tennant is just a dream. Yeah. Honestly, everything that's good about the world. And yeah, I actually haven't, so Ace, I haven't seen the original Doctor Who's, and that's a journey I one day want to go on, because I love Doctor Who. And I'm working through the new series again for the millionth time. And I think there's so much that's just joyful and hopeful about it as a series. I thought the Shakespeare Code, Ace, isn't that the one that like the David Tennant episode was called? Or is it another episode in with the Fourth Doctor, because that's something I will watch immediately. So Future Skeleton says Marvel's 1612 has a plotline where the Fantastic Four save Billy Shakes.
If you've not read that I highly recommend that one. That book is wonderful. And if you know a lot about Marvel, that's great because there's payoffs for that. If you don't, it's still a great story.
Oh, so, no. Did you? When?
Oh, no.
Well, yes. I'm embarrassed. There's also a comic series called Kill Shakespeare, which takes like all of the characters and puts them all together, which is really fun.
You also have to remember, like, I've heard her talk about how many books that she buys and wants to buy. And so, like, I feel that, like, no, I know someone lent it to me at one point. And they're like, hey, did you read that? And I'm like, did I? They're like, I lent it to you? I'm like, I bet you did. I should look for that so I can read it and give it back to you. So,
Dennis, to answer your question, Jodie Whittaker. I first started watching Doctor Who when I was in London for grad school. And so Matt Smith was the first Doctor I saw. And then I went back. I love David Tennant to the moon and back. I love his Doctor. I love Matt Smith's Doctor. I don't know if I could have picked a favorite between them up until 2 weeks ago when I watched Jodie Whittaker. She's by far my favorite. I love her. There's nothing that I love her. I think that she is full of hope and wonder and all of the parts of all of the other Doctors that we love so much. And I think she's amazing. I did not skip Eccleston. I like Christopher Eccleston. He's fine. I saw him in Antigone as Creon, and he's like a very bad stage actor. So I like, and he's also not a great TV actor, but also Doctor Who is not about it's not about how good the writing is. It's never been good. Stop trying to pretend it's ever been good. It's not about how good the acting is. It's never been good. Stop trying to pretend it's ever been good. But I just don't love him as much as I love the other ones. And like I liked 12 too.
Peter Capaldi.
Peter Capaldi as well. I love him. And I loved The Fires of Pompeii was one of my favorite Tennant episodes.
Oh, so good.
I'm not saying the acting is bad. These are phenomenal actors who are playing these parts, but it is a pop fluff show that has some moments of depth, nuance, and beauty. It is not to be watched the way that you watch, a Hamlet for how good the Hamlet actor is, which, by the way, David Tennant is the good Hamlet actor.
That's the correct answer. Okay, so anyone in the chat was playing along at home, that's the correct answer.
So Kit Kat says, struggled to say it was Doctor Who, couldn't get past Matt Smith. And I think a lot of it is who we see first. And then seeing that drastic change is going to throw us for a loop, because you've been living with this character for years and then you get someone new. And I think that's the beauty of the Doctor. It allows us, I'm going to throw a Hamilton. I'm going to throw a Hamilton reference out there and y'all capture this on clips because it'll never happen again. But when George Washington sings Teach Them How to Say Goodbye, or whatever the song is actually called, I think that's the beauty of Doctor Who, is that it teaches us that we can't hold on to these actors. We can hold on to the character and the idea of the Doctor, but we need to learn to say goodbye to the actors and the distinct personalities. So let me see. I got on a rant and then stopped reading chat. Don't Blink. Yes, Imaginary Nomad, one of the top episodes. I got to watch it with Mike over Halloween, and it was really, really fun. Oh, okay. That's cool, Ace, about the Fourth Doctor. I'll have to go back and kind of catch up on those. Zygon Invasion. I'm not going to read the whole chat because it is in the spirit of Botch podcast. But I don't know what, Dennis, what Doctor is that? What episode? Because I'm drawing a blank. I just watched David Tennant come back or start in my rewatch. And yes, Tony, let's not pretend it's high art. it boils me in a bunch when people are like, but the writing. I'm like, the writing was never good. Stop trying to make it something it wasn't. But you know what? So is Shakespeare. Shakespeare's not high art. Stop trying to pretend Shakespeare is high art. Shakespeare is dick jokes. That's all it is. It is beautifully written dick jokes.
Oh, I think one of my favorite things was the English teacher I had in high school when he explained to us what the nurse was talking about in Romeo and Juliet, and I was like, this woman is my spirit animal. I love this. I was like, she's like, Juliet's having this big moment. She's just like, I remember you when you're on your back before. And I'm like, I like you. You're a lot funnier now. So
I also didn't know that Doctor Who started out as an after school educational show.
Yep. Yeah.
That's super cool. I hadn't seen that in chat yet. That's awesome. And it's a great way to look at events in history, and then with that, again, anachronistic spin on it of how different people can set off different changes in history is a cool is a cool way to look at the world and to look at history. And plus, like, I don't know, it just has a spirit about it that is beautiful. Like, it has a beautiful spirit and it's full of hope. And yes, true that Dennis is there were a lot of good Capaldi speeches that I don't know if get enough credit, because I think people wrote Capaldi off. But I'm excited to rewatch his seasons because I've only watched them once. And then you look at perspective of an artist. You look at Vincent and the Doctor, and that episode will make me sob every single time, because as artists and as creators, we never think about kind of the impact we might make in the future. And I know that's grand of me to say about myself and my silly little podcast, but like, art is so important. In this most recent season and I hope I'm not spoiling it if you haven't watched the most recent season with Jodie Whittaker, plug your ears, take your headphones off. But when she decides to save Shelley's life over preventing the cyber war, and she says, words matter, words are important, and words change people's lives. Like, it's such a, like, I don't know. It just hits in a way, like, as an artist, that feels like that's the reason I keep coming back to it, even though it is a fun puff piece. Yeah, and I think that's fair, Dennis. Showrunner is a huge part of it, and understanding the relationship with the companions as well. And I think for me, one of the reasons that Jodie was so good is because her companions already had history with each other. It's the same thing that you want to try and avoid. We met in a tavern in D&D, because getting to know these characters takes so much time to start into it. You have to give it time to grow, because these characters already knew each other. Because these characters already knew each other, we were able to have more chemistry right off the bat. Imaginary Nomad, we are sketching Shakespeare. I don't want none of your sass. It's sketching Doctor Who. That's going to be our next time. I'm going to bring Doctor Who monologue, and you're going to sketch that.
Oh no, what will I do?
So I mean, it looks like it's so, the panel is, I guess, getting back to Shakespeare. It's so dark and it's so ominous, and because The Tempest is a comedy, I didn't expect it. Like, I chose a violent scene, but I still didn't expect it to be this dark and ominous. And it's so cool. Hey. And that, like, that close up on the fear. Tell me, on Ariel's shirt, or I guess like clothes, those lines, is it like just pen stroke, or was there an intention
as far as
the texture on it?
Like this part right here?
Nope, on the bottom panel.
On the bottom panel? Don't help Clip Studio. So some of that is just pen stroke, but I also wanted to keep the ethereal, there's the word, nature to it. So I don't want him to be as grounded, as hard edged, as in costume as maybe the sailors are. And obviously I'm still working very, very sketchy, but like in this scene where I gave him a hat and you can clearly see facial expressions, like I wanted the fluidity and that ethereal part of it to keep with this character, to really separate him from the human characters.
Okay, so I'm going to I think I don't know if I can share my screen, but I want to share and still have you on here. Okay, so this is how are we doing this? There we go. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. This is Colin Morgan, who's famously he's Merlin in that BBC show.
Oh, okay. I was
for all the nerds out there. But they styled him with feathers, so his whole neck down is feathered. And when I was looking at your, there we go. I'm learning StreamYard. When I was looking at your drawing of it, that's immediately what I read on your.
Oh, that's great.
Was feathers. And I think it's because that's the picture that I have in my mind of Ariel.
Yeah.
The strokes are very similar. It was like a really cool, just kind of fortuitous,
very happy accident in that, but it works. And I'm betting at least some of that with the costuming is meant to give him, even when he's maybe not moving, the costume moves because it's got so many pieces to it that it would give it movement and flow. Like you look at flapper dresses where they've got all those fringe layers that all you have to do is move a little bit and then you get this waving pattern happening throughout it. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was a conscious effort to be like, no, this will also not just separate him visually, but it will give him movement even when he is just speaking. Not just speaking, but when he is speaking, his character is kind of undulating. We'll say, which is such a weird word, but
no, that's super cool though. I love that, and I love the movement it gives because it is something that's a little bit different from the flat, kind of just shadowy bits of the other characters in the scene. That's so cool. So we have an Instagram.
We do.
That we we'll put this on, I think, Emily.
Yeah.
If you're cool with that. But I feel like we're in a wrap-up space.
Yeah, I'm happy with it. Again, obviously I wouldn't count this as a quote unquote, this is my finished piece, but what, for an hour, 45 minutes? We went? Yeah. It's so cool. That was a lot of fun.
It's just to see the movement in it and to be able to see the scene, because that's exactly that's the speech. It's on paper. That's a visual representation of the speech. And it's so powerful. And it's so even for, as you say, rough sketch, although it's so much more than that. It's the movement in the first panel is so, and then to have just the flat black of the last panel with just that little bit of fire behind him is such a cool journey through the page.
And the goal, so just, stepping back and obviously looking at the whole thing, my push as an artist is to drive you and to make you want to get to that final panel. And the cool thing, obviously motion comics change them a little bit, but when you flip open a comic page, you can see everything. You can see top to bottom what's going to happen in that scene. So that has to be a part of it. It's why there's a beautiful thing about, if you're utilizing a print medium, if you have, your first page is just one page, then you're flipping, you're going to have two pages side by side. If you want to set up a reveal that the audience isn't going to see until they flip the page, you need to think about where that reveal is going to come. And so, the same thing with knowing that my audience is going to see my whole first page, how do I want that to speak to them? And what do I want it to say? And, what do I want to focus them in on? And yeah, and it's funny because some of it is still, because I've done it a lot, some of it is kind of second nature and subconscious. So it's fun for me to actually walk through like, okay, so why did I do that? I could see it in my head, but why? What was the thinking behind it? And even what's fun is with a lot of these, especially if you're working in a collaborative sense, you can show thumbnails. You could show, I would show you this idea and we could talk through and be like, oh, by the way, this is something we need to get in there. And then we could add to it and tweak it and make it better. Just I like collaborating, but it's you're actually getting my whole thought process into why I'm structuring things this way and why I'm focusing on what I'm focusing on.
So. Yeah, it's cool. It's rad as hell.
This is so fun. This is so much fun.
Yeah, thank you guys for sticking around. It was awesome to have everyone here and to be able to like see, your thoughts and your experiences, and then also your, trains of thought passersby. Yes. I think that we're gonna hopefully try to do this again. Yeah. I loved it.
Hey, good. That was awesome. Oh,
well, yay. Hell yeah.
Thank you.
So I do want to be able to like save it to, awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Ace. Thanks, L. Hanley. I feel like if you give the two of us the space to nerd out about the things that we like so clearly have devoted all of our mental space to for so many years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like, I'm like, okay, scale it back. Next week, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have my whiteboard out and I'm gonna be drawing a meter out on my board.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you all so much for sticking around. Thanks for being here. Make sure to check out the boys on Wednesday. I know most of you do, but we've got some, I think, new names to me. Yeah. So come back on Wednesday at 8 for less Shakespeare, but more boys.
Well, and what's great is if you aren't already following them on Twitch, if you hit that follow button, it will alert you anytime they go live, and that covers the boys and the girls, everyone of the ADD multiverse. So you get to catch us all. So so yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.